Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled The College Application Guide for Neurodivergent Students. Leading today's presentation is Laura Barr. Laura is an experienced college consultant who has propelled the educational journey of thousands of students from cradle to college. Laura's expertise stems from decades of experience as an educator, administrator, writer, and instructional coach. Today's webinar will demystify the college application process. Deadlines, essays, choosing the right school, they're all less daunting when you know what to expect and what your student needs. With a practical mindset and advice from Laura, caregivers and teens will be able to approach this journey with confidence. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. Right now, what are your top priorities when evaluating colleges for your neurodivergent teen or students? Please select your answers, and you can also comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, certificates of attendance, you can click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search for podcast number 469 to access the webinar resources. You can also click on the episode description wherever you stream your podcasts, and there you will find a brand new Attitude download that details how to secure accommodations in college. It's free, so make sure to take a look. And if you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. If you subscribe today, you will receive Attitude's special 25th anniversary issue featuring a who's who of ADHD experts. Click the magazine tab on your screen to learn more. And finally, the sponsor of the webinar today is Landmark College. Landmark College was the first institution of higher education to exclusively serve students who learn differently, including students with learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, or executive function challenges. The college offers associate and bachelor's degrees, as well as short-term programs on its Putney, Vermont campus, along with a growing selection of online programs. Click the link on your screen or visit landmark.edu to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Okay, without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Laura Barr. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today and leading this discussion on the daunting college application process.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today. So a lovely introduction. My name is Laura Barr. I'm the owner and founder of Emerging Educational Consulting. We provide one-to-one mentorship for students and parents from the beginning to end of the college application process. We always say, I wake up every day to grow good humans. I am certified in this and educated in that, and I have my master's, blah, blah, blah. But I often say my honorary PhD I have bestowed upon myself is raising and launching 4 kids, each of them who has a unique profile, including ADHD, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder, and highly gifted. So I come to this conversation today as a mother and as an expert. So I have a lot of empathy. I have been through this. All 4 of my kids are now launched and in their 20s. And so I have some perspective in the past and also a lot of optimism for the future for all of you who are here today. I love neurodiverse brains and have dedicated my life to advocating and empowering students who don't fit into the mold. You know, my heart of my life is being a teacher, and I love education, but too often I have seen the education system squash the spirit of neurodiverse students because they just don't fit into that box. I often tell my neurodiverse students and clients that, man, we've just got to get through these high school years, because once you graduate, there are more choices. You have more time. You can focus on the things that you love and not have to be an expert at everything, the way our schools demand expertise from all areas. And if we can just get through high school and through the college application process, there's so much to look forward to. And it's really because of my experience with my own kids and my own children. And when I mean kids, I mean like all my practice all these years. I wrote the capstone field guide to the college application process. And so this neurodiverse guide, really, I wrote in the spirit of all students who are college ready should have access to higher education in a way that works for them. And I wrote the curriculum in a philosophy called UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, which is a way of thinking about teaching and learning that provides different learning modalities so that different students can access the curriculum in the way that they learn best. So the way that I think about talking about the college application process is through different stages. And we talk about early expedition, middle expedition, late expedition, and solo expedition. And the solo expedition is the moment, really, what we signed up for when we had kids. And that is to raise kids who are launched into the world as independent, contributing citizens, ready to take on the challenges and the joys of being an adult. And so when I think about this process, I think about it as not only getting into college, that's part of it, but I really want to make sure students stay in college when they get there. So as we head into, as I head into the presentation, there's some things we're going to cover today, 6 different areas that are going to frame the talk. We're going to talk about how the importance of understanding your student, understanding the college application process, getting and staying organized, overcoming procrastination, crafting a compelling application, and the parent's role in this process. Understanding your student is one of the most important things we can really talk about as we start this process. As we all know, neurodivergent students have unique needs that need to be considered. And I think anyone sitting on this webinar knows that neurodivergent students have amazing gifts and challenges. Obviously, every student is different, but each of them has some things in common that I've noticed over the years. For instance, students with neurodiverse challenges often are incredibly gifted at being able to focus on things they love. They are incredibly creative, loyal, and passionate and intense. This is an incredible asset when thinking about applying to college, because that's what colleges ask of our students: to be creative, to be loyal, to be passionate. The challenges often are things like not focusing on non-preferred activities, executive function challenges, getting brilliant ideas down on paper. And often, one of the biggest challenges is having students see beyond just what's right here and envisioning that future. So it is very important in many ways for us to be expert on our kids, because what we're really asking of them is to begin to be experts on themselves. Them really understanding, what are my strengths, what are my challenges, so that they can decide collectively, we can decide, are they college ready? And when I think about college ready, I think about 4 different areas. I think about academic achievement, social, emotional, and mental health, personal awareness, daily living skills, independence, relationship skills, and have they developed interest and passions that can develop into an area of study that they want to study or a career. When parents ask me what is the best way for me to assess if my child is college ready, I think about two areas. I think about collecting qualitative data and I think about qualitative data. Quantitative data includes things like IEP, neuropsychs, IEP data. I think about SAT and ACT scores. I think about grades and transcripts, any assessments that may help us gauge how are my students doing compared to their peers, and are they growing independently based on their own goals and aptitude. Qualitative data might be things like parent intuition. I've had many parents call me and be like, there is no way my kid is going to go to college because I can't even get them to wake up in the morning to go to school. Right. And so we really want to gauge those kind of like parent intuition. We want to be listening to our teachers. In our practice, we have a launch checklist where we have about 24 different criteria for parents to consider, which might include things like, do they wake up every day? Do they manage their own medication? Do they manage money in their bank accounts? Do they know how to take public transportation, do their own laundry, attend school regularly? And I can't see you all, but I imagine many of you are going, oh my gosh, my student doesn't do any of that. And that's okay. It's one of the reasons I'm talking about it is because the earlier we can start incorporating some of these little habits, the more successful they're going to be when they do make that transition to solo expedition. I actually wrote a little book in 2015 called The Entitlement Antidote. And the idea of the book was to have parents start in kindergarten, setting up some family systems and rituals that help students build these kind of independent living skills so that they're contributing not only to their home, but ultimately being able to contribute to the wider community. Now, if you don't have any systems in place and your child is a teenager, all I ask is that you start slow and add a new habit every few weeks. And if you're really into habit stacking the way I am, there's a great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear that is a fabulous, gives great tips on how to manage all of those different possibilities of what those habits could be. So again, it's like, great, we can get our child into college, but once they get there, if they can't do their laundry and they can't feed themselves and they can't take their medication, we really have a problem. And I want to avoid that as much as we can by creating those systems. So I think once we have kind of gauged, is my student college ready? It's important for us to next really understand what the process entails. And I think one thing that I have noted is that many adults really do not understand what the college process entails. It is so different than when most of us applied to college. I literally typed one essay on a typewriter and put it in an envelope, licked the envelope and sent it and went to college. Several months later, like the stakes were so different back then. And today it has become much more complicated, it is rigorous, and extremely time consuming. A student who has 10 to 12 colleges on their list may have about 10 to 15 essays to write, which involves a great deal of research, writing. They need to have a resume, activity list. It's important for students to be building relationships with teachers because teachers will ultimately write recommendations. They need to do interviews and visits. And this adds an incredible layer to an already complicated high school experience. Our number one advice is 100% start the process early. Tiny steps get the job done and create a safety net for parents and students. And when I say early, we often start with our students in 8th grade to begin conversations about interests, passions, time management, building habits. What is a GPA anyway? I mean, some of these kids in 8th grade, you'd be surprised, they don't even know what GPA means. They don't even know what it means, what scores they have to get. They don't really understand what courses they need to select. It's important, even though some schools have graduation requirements, that doesn't necessarily mean that is what a certain college requires. So making sure, understanding course of study, all of those pieces are just crucial. And by starting early, we really can help students plan their minutes and get practice in doing what most neurodivergent students struggle with, which is really seeing the path ahead of them. I think the other thing that we really promote is this idea of creating a realistic and balanced college list. The important word here is realistic. I have noticed over the years that neurodiverse students have big aspirations, and I love these students for that. I can't tell you how many freshmen come to me and say, I want to go to Stanford, Yale, and Princeton. I either want to be an astronaut or I want to be president. And I'm like, yes, let's go. I am 100% going to be the person who's going to stand by a student's dreams. But I also am going to make sure my parents and my students understand that the college process has become more complicated and that colleges in general are more selective. There's more people applying, and there are more and more hoops that students have to jump through to be able to show their unique identities through this process. So I am constantly inviting parents to understand that there are thousands of colleges and there are many different paths and options to get to higher education. And so I think the thing that I have learned is that for students who do start early and who embrace this fact that the process is rigorous and time consuming and create realistic and balanced lists, that suddenly this process becomes this low stress process where students get to practice envisioning their future, they get to set goals, and they get to use the final application as like, this is their capstone portfolio of how they chose to spend their minutes. I use the Annie Dillard quote quite a bit that says, how you spend your days is how you spend your life. And neurodivergent students have such incredible gifts that when they have the opportunity to plan and look forward, the things that they can do are absolutely incredible. And it's just so exciting to be a part of that process when students nail it. Let's talk a little bit about the range of options. I'll navigate this. The range of options. I like to think about this in several different ways. One is that there are different kinds of colleges and experience students can have. So there are colleges that are designed specifically for neurodiverse students. I'm going to talk about Landmark in a second, but Landmark and Beacon are a few of those. We have options that have traditional colleges that have strong disability and support services with counseling, tutoring, writing centers, and rigorous accommodation policies. And then there's this overall idea that even in those schools that are more traditional, I'm wanting families to make sure that the overall philosophy of the institution is generally inclusive and that communities that support neurodivergence as an overall value is part of that university vision and mission. When I get a little more specific on those, I think about this evaluating, are our students college ready? If they are not traditional college ready, then there's a couple options we can think about. We can not go to college. Students can pursue a trade that specializes in an area such as automotive, cooking, hairdressing, aviation, welding. Sometimes gap programs can be really helpful in giving students more time, but I'm often cautious with neurodivergent students in gap year because I also don't want gap to be a way to put off the inevitable that really students don't have the skills that they need. So I'm really careful about the kind of gap year programs that I recommend for students. Attending a specialized college program like Landmark, who is our sponsor today. They did not pay me to say this, but I will tell you that I absolutely love this institution. It is a community designed exclusively for students with diagnosed learning disabilities such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, executive function challenges. What I love about this college and other colleges like it are that the strengths-based model of like, what are you good at and how are we going to place you in different classes that also, by the way, are designed with universal design learning so that you can access this curriculum in a way that has you succeed in college and beyond. And I don't think these colleges are colleges are considered enough for neurodivergent students. And I mean, Landmark in particular is in a beautiful location, has all kinds of programs, and definitely worth taking a look at in that process. Then there's just like going ahead and seeking a traditional college opportunity. There are colleges, I know somebody asked this question earlier, are there specific colleges that have programs within themselves? And the answer is yes. For instance, University of Arizona has this incredible program called the SALT program that's designed for students who are on the spectrum. Another example of a school that doesn't have an actual program associated with it, but has a great Office of Learning Accessibility is a small liberal arts school called Lewis and Clark. Those programs actually are very supportive of taking students who do qualify for learning services and guide those students through the process of being in college in a way that individualizes the process, but also gives them the accommodations that they need. So we know as college consultants which colleges do that really well. By the way, at the end of this presentation, you're going to have the opportunity to download a PDF of our neurodivergent guide to the college application process. And we have a link in there to many of those colleges. So you will have access to that Google Doc on view only to check out some of those colleges if that is of interest to you. There's also programs that support students. As a matter of fact, I did have a student who attended Lewis and Clark. And while they were at Lewis and Clark, the parents hired an organization that does executive functioning supports while students are in college. There's a program called Mansfield Hall that's fabulous, and they have a virtual program where students check in every day, they get their day started. While many colleges don't offer that level of support, there's ways to supplement the kinds of needs, executive function needs that students might have. There's something is really important for me to mention, and I hope that this isn't something that you guys already know and don't need to hear about, but it is often misunderstood where the IEP 504 fits into college. I'm going to go over really quickly the differences. So as most of you know, because hopefully you have an IEP or a 504 if you're sitting here today with a neurodivergent child, but an IEP is that legal binding document that's created for students with disabilities in K through 12 public education. Section 504 plan is governed by that Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibits discrimination based on disability. The ADA is the federal law that protects and prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in various aspects of public life, including education, all public and private universities, colleges, as well as other institutions. The ADA is not an education plan like an IEP or a 504. It reinforces the requirement for reasonable accommodations to ensure access to educational opportunities. I know there's a lot of words in there, but the gist is students do not take their IEP and their 504 to college. Instead, they create plans specific to the college that they're attending, and every college does it differently. And so when we're doing college search and match, we are really gauging what is it that my student needs, what does the student feel like that they need, and then this ability to match their needs with what the college offers. That is how we get to that sweet spot. So pro tip, make sure your evaluations are in order. because one of the things about qualifying for ADA disability services at colleges is to have documentation. So that means if you are, and usually that documentation has to be 3 years up to date, but colleges have their own requirements. So they may say we wanted a year up to date. So understanding each college requirement is pretty crucial. I know this leads me to the question that often I get asked, which is, do I need to disclose my disability on my college application? And the answer is no. You do not need, there is no place where you have to disclose a disability on a college application. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. So I'll come back to that. All right. So once we have an idea and direction, right? So we've gone through this idea of like, do I know my student? Do I understand what the process entails? Which path am I going to take? And then there's this idea of like, now it's time to get the project started. Staying organized is probably the most difficult part of this process. I can't stress enough how in-depth this is. To take on the college application process is a gargantuan project. I often think about, I don't know how many of you have read this great book. It's called The Manifesto Checklist by Abdul Gawande. And his whole philosophy is no matter how expert, no matter how smart you are or where you are, that a well-designed checklist can improve outcomes. And he did this project with his surgeons. Pilots do it. And in my opinion, this is what the best way we can support our students to reduce stress is to start early and to have buckets of checklists because there are so many different aspects that need to be accomplished. So creating an organized system to keep track of applications, deadlines, and required documents. Some of these tips will include using Google Folder, Calendar, really having your student have a system. Starting sophomore year, I feel like students should really be checking their emails, getting some habits around their drive, making folders, creating folders in their email for different colleges they might be interested in, tracking deadlines, putting deadlines either on the calendar or creating spreadsheets. Making sure transcripts are in order, letter recommendations, other required documents, resumes, activities lists, keeping track of volunteering, all of those things are really important when it's time to put that full application together. All of these required documents, much easier if we do it earlier than later. It is hard to find all this stuff if it's not in an organized place. I also want to stress that once students have been accepted, this is just the beginning of staying organized. Not in my practice, but I have heard stories of students who didn't fill out their housing form in time and got disenrolled. Once students get into college, the project continues. And then the project of attending college continues. So really this idea of like starting early and getting these habits in place is really going to support the long-term success in college, not just getting in. And you've heard me say that a bunch. Let's see, we're going to move to overcoming procrastination. This is just a question I get asked over and over again, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I think what I've set up throughout this presentation is what helps overcome procrastination. We all know procrastination is rooted in fear of not being good enough, fear of not being smart enough, fear of not being able to know what to do to get the job done. When we know what the job is and understand exactly what is expected, it is much easier for us to tackle those tasks, breaking them down into smaller, manageable steps, having a task due every week starting your junior year is much easier than having to do 4 tasks in a week at the end of your junior year. So really breaking those tasks down. And one thing that we do that I actually love, and I used to do this with my own kids all the time, even when they were little, is to set realistic but often arbitrary deadlines. So in our practice right now, we're like in a big push. We're like, all your applications are due September 15th. It's time, like, get going. We're ready. We're going to be reading. Our editors are on point. You're going to be getting feedback. If you don't get it in, we're not going to read it. So right now, everybody's like, we've created this arbitrary deadline because the deadline actually isn't until like November 1st. But if we start this kind of like, we want to be done by, and I was thinking about it today because other things that I've done over the years, and I'm sure many of you are kind of like that first then has been a strategy of your parenting. So first you do this, first you get this essay, cut and paste it into your Common App, then we're going to go camping this weekend. But we can't go camping unless you get that done, right? Like all of these ways that we can set up, use those tools that we've learned from our psychologists and therapists and teachers and special ed teachers. They come into great use when we get to this point of motivating students. I'm fine with families setting up motivational things with money. For instance, like if you get this done, I'll match your allowance so that you can go to this concert, things like that. Those are great little tips that can help along the way. Let's get into crafting a compelling application. This is the fun part. This is really the fun part for me, which is we've kind of gone through all of this. We're college ready. We're ready to start this application. We have all the systems into place. Now we have this moment where we get to tell the story, the student story, and we get to decide what makes this student unique in a way that's going to make this application compelling to a college or a university. Colleges are looking for students who have drive, intellectual curiosity, diversity of experiences. Colleges want to know how students are going to contribute to their community. And they also want to know how they can contribute to your students' dreams and aspirations. So the job of the college application is to prove your student has these traits. And the way they do that is through stories. Again, through this idea of qualitative and quantitative data. This is what colleges are considering in a holistic application approach. Many of you know it is to our great advantage, those of us who raise neurodivergent kids or who are neurodivergent applying to grad schools or any of that sort. Test optional has become common. And that is so exciting because we do not need to submit tests. And if you're curious about colleges that are taking incorporating test optional policies, you can go to fairtest.org and you can see that whole list. And so I'm just delighted about that. But what that means is that without the quantitative data, that has been typically used, is there some other things that are coming that are raising level of importance. So for instance, that idea of building relationships with teachers, teacher recommendations matter. And if we go look at the common data set, we can often see that many schools have that as one of their most important things that they consider is a teacher recommendation, which means we have to backwards plan that. We need students building relationships with teachers starting their junior year. We can't really do it senior year when they have like 3 weeks they know a teacher to ask someone to write a recommendation. So I'm always working with students on building relationships with teachers, going into office hours, or making sure if you didn't understand something to really try to understand it by going above and beyond, those kinds of things. And then obviously the essay, if you're following any of this stuff around affirmative action, the essay is becoming hugely important. And so what that means is that students need to know themselves really well, and they need to have experiences and stories to tell. And they often need help and support getting those big ideas onto paper. So I know that everybody out there is going to be asking me the question, how do I talk about learning challenges on the college application? Should I write my college essay about having ADD or dyslexia? And obviously this depends, and every story, every student is different, and every story of how their learning disability has impacted their life is different. And I really honor that. I used to think about this with my own kids, specifically my daughter, Olivia, who has autism spectrum disorder. I used to feel like her autism was just a part of herself. It wasn't all of who she was. And it was just one story to tell. And when I think about students using their disability as a way to frame their common application essay, I often ask the question, is there a better story to tell that highlights the strengths and lets us into the student's heart of who they are as a human being? If that is true, if their disability is part of that, then yes, let's figure out a way. But I also want to remind families that there is a section in the common application that allows people to explain, students to explain what their strengths and challenges are that may need to be explained. For instance, if they have progression issues with moving schools, if they have grades, D's in math or C's in so-and-so, but A's in something else, we can explain that there. And usually we keep it pretty simple. So because there's so many stories these kids have, their identity is not just their learning disability. So that is my approach, and everybody has a different approach, and it's very personal. All right, let's get to role of caregiver. I want to get to questions because I know I'm supposed to be done like 1 minute ago. Here's the deal with caregiver. We are our child's biggest advocate, 100%. With a child who has neurodiversity challenges, especially around executive function, it is our job to support. In our practice, we say we support, but our students do the heavy lifting. Because here's the deal. If your students can't do this process, this project, without doing the heavy lifting, it's possible they're not ready for college when we thought they were. And it is a great test to watch and gauge how capable they are of being able to get this job done. I am also a big fan of getting support. And that means, I'm saying this as a mother, is that our job of our teenagers is to separate from ourselves. The last thing they usually want is us breathing down their neck around their college applications. But the project is so intense that getting support from a counselor, a teacher, a college consultant, someone in their life who can help them is probably in the end going to be better than you. But God bless you if you can pull that off. Finally, I really just want to say that, the job here that we're all up to is this idea of growing good humans. And this is the quote that I use in my practice all the time. I'm just going to read it really quick and then I'm going to stop talking. We don't become better because we acquire new information. We become better because we acquire better loves. We don't become what we know. Education is a process of love formation. When you go to school, it should offer you new things to love. And back to what I said at the beginning, is the most exciting thing for neurodivergent students when they go to college is they finally get to focus on what they love instead of just always playing the game of school. So I am so happy to have hopefully guided you a bit on this process. And let's go ahead and start with some questions. I'm not sure if somebody says something to me. Let's see.
I'm so sorry. I thought my mic was back on, but I got so excited. I forgot. Sorry about that. We are ready for Q&A. I just want to thank one more time our sponsor, Landmark College, for sponsoring today's webinar. And I did want to take a quick look at the survey results that everyone submitted to kick off today. And the number one answer for your top priorities when evaluating colleges was available support services. And so that just leads into a great question that came in, which is more about the process of evaluating potential schools. You named a few that have good programs. When looking at other colleges, are there red flags? And on the flip side, good signs that a school will be supportive of different thinkers?
Yeah, I think that question is a big one, because this is back to this idea of like, what does your student need and what does the college offer? And so we did provide in our guide that you can put your email in and download the PDF. We have a link to all of the colleges that we recommend to our families so that you can look and you can assess. We actually have a link on that that actually links you to exactly the program of the college. And some of those colleges will include things like they do create learning plans, or they have writing centers, or they have private tutors, or you have a coach. Some will be more general. You just get access to accommodations. So really, the quick answer to that is it is the job of the student to do the research, to figure out what it is that they need out of that program. Students can call accessibility services before they apply, and they can talk about what the different offerings are, so that even before they apply, they decide, is that what I need?
Okay. That makes sense. And again, like they can call and ask these questions without necessarily
disclosing disability or name. That's an important factor, right? You don't need to call and be like, my so-and-so is applying. Or you could just say, hey, we're just checking it out. We're looking at all different colleges. This is what we need, but you do not need to disclose along the way.
Perfect. Great advice. Okay. And then coming back to our survey, a specific major or interest was number 2 on the list in terms of top priorities, which really dovetails so nicely with the quote that you provided there at the end, Laura, about finding a love. I love that idea that you're no longer like playing the game of school, that you're actually discovering your loves and your passions. So that seems to really strike a nerve with our audience. I love that. Of course, school location, size, tuition cost are the other priorities here. And I'm wondering if you do advise that neurodivergent students prefer a smaller school with a smaller ratio of students to professors, or if, again, it's just dependent on the individual.
It is so dependent on the individual. I have a student right now who she is absolutely, she's diagnosed on the autism spectrum. She is diagnosed with ADHD, and man, she is determined to be a small fish in a big pond. She wants lots of options for friends and access to a city where if school isn't working, she can go, pursue her passions of art history. And it just is so dependent. I would say in general, we think often small environments might be better, but often there's programs within big universities that give access to students to smaller classes and cohorts. So it is part of that. What is it that I want, and what does this college offer? I know this is like so broad, but this is the tricky part, right? Like this is the part of the research that is what I want you guys to leave with, is to know what you're looking for. Right. So if my student says, I want a big school, you're like, great, well, we need to look for all the big schools that have learning support services, and maybe dorms for students who need a quieter dorm or things like that. Like we really want to get so clear about what it is that we're looking for, because then we can we can even ask ChatGPT, what colleges have the quietest dorms? And maybe I haven't looked that up yet, but I might after this.
ChatGPT, maybe it's useful for something. Just joking. Okay, so one of the most common questions that we got here today is regarding student resistance to help. Parents are wondering how much do they push, with the downside, of course, being, the risk being missed deadlines that could mean the difference between getting an application in or not. How much do they push versus how much do they prioritize their relationship with their child?
It's such a good question. And I know this firsthand. My son, Christopher, wouldn't listen to one thing I said. He has major ADHD. I'm like the college consultant guru, and I couldn't get him. He wouldn't let me hire him help. He wouldn't let me help him. He wrote his essay in front of Family Guy in 20 minutes. He wouldn't, I didn't even get a look at, I don't even know if it was edited or not. He applied to one school. Thank God he got in. And then when he got to college, I was like, every day I was just praying he wasn't going to come home the next week. And slowly but surely, he graduated from college, and now he's this incredibly successful businessman at 25 years old, and just fits in that whole, particularly ADD, impulsive male profile, stereotypical, but he fits into it. And so here's the deal, that it was so hard for me to let go, but ultimately he's the one going to college. And if he didn't get in, that was going to be on him. I think it's rough. I also think that it is our job with neurodivergent students to hold a place, to see in them what they don't see in themselves. So to me, in my family, I really tried to create this balance. And I was pretty strict as a parent in that, like, that's great. You don't have to have me read your essay, but you won't be going to this weekend with your friends until your college application is in. Like, it's a value in our family that you're going to apply to college. So you can do it with me, you can do it without me, you can do it with help, but you will not go to this next place until that is done. And that's what happened. It's funny because he actually, it's on my website somewhere deep down, but when my son Devin applied to college 4 years later, Christopher wrote Devin a letter. And it was a letter saying, please don't do what I did. I didn't listen. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And I limited my options. And yes, I went to my state school, but I probably could have done more. And I kind of wish I had. And I want you not to do what I did, which is a very sweet letter to me, but just shows you that these kids don't always see what's right in front of them. Our job is to hold and set and create boundaries that help them be able to stay to what we believe they can be. And that's an art and a science. And I think often parenting coaches can help. I mean, listen, Attitude Magazine has the most tips of anything around this kind of stuff. So using those resources and setting up routines and rituals, I think can really help in the process. But I get it. I mean, when I write all this, I'm like, okay, this sounds so easy compared to what it is actually having kids in your house doing this. I get it. I'm just going to say one more thing, that the letting go may have to be part of the conversation. And that's probably the hardest thing, is just letting go.
Agreed. And you talked about, those, like, motivation is another big question that's come in. And so tying in those, rewards, the perks of life, tying those into hitting these milestones in this long process does help with motivation. It might not make you the good guy for a while, but it does help. A lot of people are saying that, obviously, that we know ADHD minds tend to be on a now, not now basis. And so getting into, it's a long lead time. You're talking about a September 15th deadline, and you're not starting school for another year. That's really hard for these neurodivergent minds to get excited and motivated about the process. So I think that's an important point to underscore. A lot of questions also about gap years. I know, again, it depends on every student, but one person wrote in to say, will it be harder for their student to navigate this process without the help of their high school guidance counselor? So if they take a gap year and they're doing the application process kind of when they're on their own, is that something to consider?
Well, I have a very strong opinion about this, which is gap years fine, but they need to go through the process and then defer. Because the whole energy around, I mean, this is my first choice, right? Is the whole energy around, we're applying, the teachers and the college counselors and everybody's helping rally to get these students ready. There's all kinds of free services at most schools. If you access them, you often have to seek them yourself, but, be proactive and get with those counselors and get it in, and then get in and then say, oh, thank you very much, I'm going to defer. And then take your gap year is my ideal. Now, with that said, I have 2 students right now that are taking gap years who didn't do that. They came to me late in the process, and it took them till these are both students who are neurodivergent, who just getting to graduation took everything they had. There was no way they were going to do this any other way. And that's an okay path. It's not the path I love, but it is a path that for some individual kids, it's the only way, because just getting to graduation is a miracle. And what happens is that if we have students who start the process now and then do a gap year, they can really focus on just that. They can hyper focus on the college application process, in which case for some of these students, we're doing it in 3 weeks as opposed to 3 years, because they have 3 weeks to dedicate 100% fully on applying to college while they're getting ready to take a gap year.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Something else I want to say about gap year, and I think I said this in my presentation, but I'm so cautious sometimes, because sometimes gap year just feels really good to everybody. Like, oh, okay, my student's going to take a gap year. We haven't really thought, like, where are we in that checklist? Like, are we doing gap year because we don't think our kid can get to college and stay there? And if that's the case, then we want to be careful about why we're doing it, so that we don't set ourselves up. So great, he gets into college a year later, but can't do college then. And so I really want families to be careful about that. There's a great program called Verto Education that I absolutely love. And many of my students have done this program. And it's pretty much a one-of-a-kind program, which is a travel abroad program. But they have created this program in 25 student cohorts, and it's all project-based learning. So they're out in the field, but they're doing college courses to get their GEs, their general ed credits. So it's like, if you're going to spend that much money on a gap year, then let's get a year of college under our belt. And by the way, colleges like to see students with gap year. There is a lot of research that shows students who are in gap programs actually do succeed and stay in college. It's just that I want to be careful, because some people will be like, oh, I'm going to do a gap year. I'm like, well, what are you doing? They're like, well, I'm going to work at the bakery that I've been working at all through high school. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I mean by a gap year. So making sure we're using the same language is important.
Absolutely. No, I'm really glad that you made that distinction. Because yes, I think you're right. A lot of people are looking at the gap year as a way to build up some of those skills that will help their child ultimately succeed. And so it's important to have a plan. Along similar lines, quite a few questions about community college and whether that may be a good option for 2 years-ish of getting some of those required courses done and then transferring to a more traditional 4-year to complete a program. Do you recommend that for some students? And are there any downsides that we should consider?
Yes. And that should have been on my, those 3 options, right? Not do typical traditional college. And then I say, either a gap year, community college should have been on there, because I think that is a great entry. The issue with community college is sometimes stigma. Depending on where you are in the country, community college can be like, everybody goes to community college. And so it feels like that's what everybody else is doing. Where for some students, the idea of community college is a bit of a stigma. And it also requires the same getting up in the morning and getting stuff done. But yes, I mean, listen, if students are willing to go, even if it's just a couple classes, I think it's a great way to prove to colleges down the road that students can do the work of college. So I'm a huge fan. I personally have a very hard time getting students to go that route.
That's interesting. It could be a real cost savings, and allow for a little bit of a bridge, right, on some of those executive function skills.
I think so too. I think for some students, the idea of leaving home is part of what they're looking towards, but they're not really willing to leave home, but they don't really want to stay with their parents and go to a couple classes. Like it's just rough because it's so easy for parents to be like, okay, we're going to do community college. And then the reality comes, all their friends go to college and they're staying at home and they're going to their community college and all, if their friends are gone, it's just harder than it sounds. It sounds really easy, but the emotional piece is a little harder. This is actually my clientele, so it might not be everybody.
Right. Well, this segues into another related question here, and that is about kind of on the flip side of students who we see this so often, different thinkers whose confidence is worn down, their self-esteem is worn down, and we want them to shoot for the stars. How can we help those students who are kind of lacking in some of that self-confidence to go for those reach schools and to really stretch themselves in this process? Any pointers for adults who want their kids to achieve all that they can?
I love this question. It actually brings tears to my eyes because this is back what I said is that our school systems not mostly, but a lot of the times make our neurodivergent students feel not good enough. And they're lacking something, which is absolutely not the case. If anything, they have so much more to bring to the real world. And I love that. But it pains me to see students come through who are just like, well, I can't get in there, or I'm not good enough to do that, or I'm not good at math, or any of these things where it's just not true. But their whole being that's all they've known for a really long time. And it's hard because parents can't be the one to be like, you're smart enough, you can do it. I really think that's where mentorship needs to come in. I really, really believe that this process is going to always be more successful when students have a mentor that is not their parent. And I personally think it is a complete travesty that our college counselors don't get paid more, that there's not more in our schools, and that for people to access, they have to pay private fees for someone like in our practice, because every student should have this right to be able to go through this process, to have a mentor and a kind of cheerleader. Also set realistic expectations. Not all students are going to be able to reach for the stars, but those who should be reaching for the stars often need a mentor. And it could be a coach. It could be somebody who's just like, wow, you've got this. Right. So I know that's not the best answer, but it really, I think someone outside of the family home who can show that student how they can succeed is probably the best way.
Right. I mean, it's cliche, but it does take a village. It really does. And it made me think of the letter that your older son wrote to your younger son. Wouldn't it be great if all of our students had someone in their life who could, share with them the wisdom and also, that push to say, I wish that I had had the confidence to do this. I really want for you to do this.
I have something to add to that because I'm imagining the parent who asked that question. I also think that there is something in our practice, we talk about values-based parenting and values-based decisions and value-based college placement. Like, I think the thing that is the parents can do the most is set that value. Like, I know that you are struggling with your self-esteem, but in our family, it is our family value that you reach for the stars. So just put two colleges on your list that reach. And if you get in, great. If you don't, great. That's just like everybody else in America. We don't know where we're going to get in and not get in, but we want to hold a place for you for reaching for the stars.
Yeah, I love that. And as you said, for those who are listening, whose kids are, not yet in this process, that's something that we can seed far in advance of even high school, but certainly of senior year. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time. I wanted to reiterate that Laura's wonderful free resource. We will make that link available to everyone when you receive the replay for this webinar. You will get that link as well. So if you missed it here, or if you want to just have another copy of the link, we will make sure to get that to you. And we've also jotted down some of the books that she's recommended, and we'll add those in the post-webinar resources as well. So I also hope that everyone listening here will join us for another Attitude webinar. We do them weekly, and next week's will be on the topic of postpartum depression, which is very common in women with ADHD. So we hope you'll join us for that. For now, Laura, thank you so much. This was incredibly useful, and it does, as the parent of a high school student myself, it does make me feel a bit more in charge of a very daunting process. So thank you.
I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to be in touch.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.